So we're going to move on now to setting this up for media queries. And there is a CodePen that will give you the starting state that I have right here if you want to switch to that CodePen, or you can just continue on in the same CodePen, which is what I'm going to do, and write the rest of the code here just inside of this. So when we go to a tablet, then we need to think about how our various arrangements are going to change as we move through our various breakpoints. So right now, let's just start up here at the top once again. Here on our set of 4 columns, maybe what we'd like to do is when we get to our breakpoint, right? Because right now, these will very happily wrap onto another row, just like Flexbox does. And if you're happy with the way things look, you could absolutely go with that as a look for your web page. Because this is what Flexbox does, right? But if you wanted to make these a little bit prettier and make them stretch across the page, then we would wind up picking a breakpoint here, whatever it happened to be. I have a utility up here. I'm in Firefox. I'm not sure if this is available for Chrome or not. And it's a little item that displays my screen dimensions up here on the top. I have it currently disabled, so if I turn it on, it'll just tell me up here on the top of the page what exactly my screen dimensions are. So it's not going to help me here in CodePen. But if I was moving the whole window, it would change my numbers up here on the top, so I could just sort of scrunch around and go, you know what, this is getting a little bit tight looking. I think I need to put a breakpoint somewhere in here. So I've actually already done the work on this though. So what I want to do is I want to add a media query. Actually, we're going to add 2 media queries. So first of all, here, everything that we've put down here so far for figure, span 2, span 3, span 4, and these various order properties, these are all for our desktop layout, right? So we actually want to put those in a media query right away. So let's go ahead and set that up. The row can stay outside of the media query. This is going to start at mobile dimensions. It will carry into all of your media queries going forward. We actually want it to continue to display flex and row wrap and the space between and the gap. We want all of that. But these values here for flex basis and the ordering and so forth, that might be desktop specific. So let's add a media query, add media. And then we'll say something like min width of something like 800 pixels. My screen's blown up so big, you know, it's hard to say for sure. Feel free to adjust to whatever makes sense for you. And we'll indent those there. Okay, so all of that, figure, span 3, span 4, order 1, 2, 3. Okay, so that's now all inside of our media query for 800 pixels and higher. So when I make my CodePen window of the appropriate size, I'll get my formatting back. Okay, so then when we go below 800 pixels, let's say starting around 550, here, I'm actually going to put in my media query here. Min width of 550 pixels. And we can wrap this media query actually around that row declaration. Now, why on earth would I do that? Because if the screen gets smaller, we're now not going to be displaying our boxes in Flexbox anymore, right? Okay, so by default, we have a whole bunch of these figures and rows and so forth. They are block level elements, right? Block configuration, and by default, they just stack on top of each other. And so by not declaring our Flexbox until we get to our tablet dimension when we actually want things to start showing up on rows, that's a pretty easy way to work with this. Now, the other way that you could do this would be to put your Flexbox declaration here outside of the media query, and you could set your flex basis for everything to 100%. So display at row wrap, but everything is 100%. Or you could go to displaying, rather than row wrap, this would be a case where you might say column wrap. So we actually do want to have a series of columns here on the page, really only one, and our flex base is 100% so that things stack on top of each other. That would be the other way to deal with this. But generally speaking, I just start declaring my Flexbox layout inside of my tablet media query and let things be outside for the mobile layouts, because they'll just stack on top of each other, which is usually what you want to do anyway. All right, so then here, all we need to do is come up with the next set of values. So in our row here for figure, our default value for figure, which will get overridden later with the classes that we have and the later values. So previously these were 22% wide. Now we want to have still our 4% gap and 2 boxes on the line. This will actually be a flex basis of 48%, right? 2 boxes on a line, 2 of them. How about our span 2? It's probably kind of the same, right? So figure and span 2 are actually going to both have that same kind of formatting. So everything's pretty good until we get down here towards the bottom of our screen, right? So we've got our row with the 4 boxes. Here it is, looking good. Here's row number 2, looks good. Row number 3, not so good. So what do we want to do at row number 3? Most likely what we want to do is we want to have our span 3 stretch to 100%, but then the item that was all by itself before, maybe we'd also like that to stretch to 100%. So we have our 2 boxes stretching to 100%. So here we'll do a span 3 with a flex basis of 100%. Okay, so there's that. Now the second box here from that row, it is doing exactly what we told it to do. It's displaying at about half the width. And if that's what you want, you can certainly leave that. But it might be that in this case, you want this one to stretch the full width of the page. What are we going to do there? Well, we're going to have to make a new type of class for that. So we might call this, I don't know, span 3.1, something like that. I'm really bad at naming these. Flex basis is also 100%. And then we'll just apply that here in our HTML. Okay. So here, class equals span 3-1. There we go. So there we have 2. In this particular case, these are both going to stretch to 100% here. But when we get the screen larger, oops, we're going to have to write a class for that too, aren't we? Because it's going to continue to do what we told it to do. When you set it here in your earlier media query, span 3.1 has a flex basis of 100%. That will carry into this later one. That's why we do all min widths. What comes before will continue into the later media queries unless you specifically override those values later. So, the span 3.1 flex basis of 100% carries into the media query here of 800 pixels unless we declare it to be something else. We probably want this instead. So span 3-1. And now when we make the screen bigger, we get that layout back again. See how we did that? But when we go smaller, it does exactly what we want it to do. 2 big boxes stacked on top of each other.
Would you not use flex direction columns so you can use align and justify?
Sure, there's lots of ways that you can do what I'm talking about. There's, you know, it's CSS. There's a bunch of different ways that you can accomplish the same kind of thing. I try to tell you things that are relatively straightforward and easy to understand in the code, but I'm sure you can find other ways of doing this if it makes more sense to you. That's great. as always, comment your code so that people understand what it is you're doing. What we have left here is, we haven't written our span 4. That's this yellow one right here. That one has not had a class added yet. So we can say span 4 has a flex basis of 100%. There we go. And when you do that, because the value here for span 4 is set here to be the same in your tablet media query and then in your desktop media query, you don't actually have to redeclare it. You can if you want to, if it makes your documentation easier to read so that people understand what's happening here. By all means, leave it in. You haven't heard anything. But you don't have to have it here inside of your desktop declaration because it will carry through from your tablet media query up here, right? We're not changing that particular breakpoint or particular flex basis value across the media queries. All right, so then the last thing to deal with is these boxes down here on the bottom. That's that 1-2-1 layout. And so here, let's take a look at our HTML again. We had a span 2, and then we had these 2 figures down here that have just this ordering type of class associated with them. Now, we could take these order classes and we could tie them into the Flexbox layout as well. Could be done. It's probably easier to leave the ordering classes as their own utility classes that you just stack up on top of the flex boxes independently. So now you have the flexibility of taking ordering anywhere you want inside of your design. So if you take that philosophy, because it's just a philosophy, technically speaking, you can do whatever you want, then we might think about adding some additional classes here in some way or another, whatever it is that you want to do here to deal with this particular situation. So probably what we want to do is we want to have this span 2 here, this first span 2, we actually want it to go to 100%. And then these last 2 figures, we want them to go to like 50%. So, so we'll probably wind up writing some additional classes for that. Following this span 3, span 3-1, we might have a span 2 -4. So it's normally 2 at desktop, 4 at a tablet media query. So here we'd say a flex basis of 100% for that. And obviously you could combine these into a single declaration as well if you wanted. And then we need to change that up here, span 2-4. And then we need to adjust that in our desktop, span 2, span 2-4. Okay, so that's good. And then these 2 here seem to be doing exactly what we want them to do already, which is behave like the boxes that we have up here at the top of the screen. So that's pretty much it. That's how you write a grid system here. Look at that. So what we did was we came up with a bunch of scenarios in our HTML. We laid them all out, documented them, right? And then we just went through and wrote a few styles for all of those. So you don't really need a huge, complicated responsive design framework to deal with this type of thing. You just need to know how to do a little bit of math, and you can put something like this together on your own.